An extract from my mother's memoirs, Mrs. Hilda Kirk, formerly Shan of Sunlight Farm. We used to drive 3.5 miles to the Presbyterian church every Sunday. We usually had unmarried men at the church who were studying to be ministers, and if we happened to be late for church, they would wait until we arrived before starting the service, as Mother was the organist. My reason for mentioning this apparently trivial matter will become apparent later. The committee men of the church decided to have a manse built and to get a married man as minister. A Mr. James Kirk, who had been in Bowen for a few years, was to be sent to Ayr. A little background about James Kirk. He was born in Scotland on the 4th of November 1857, and when he left school he worked in the shipyards on the Clyde River. However, a work accident resulted in the loss of 3 fingers on his left hand, leaving only the thumb and forefinger, so he had to leave that job and find employment elsewhere. He went to Lancashire in the north of England and worked in a shop at Rowanstall, and it was there that he met his future wife, Jane Buckley. From the age of 8 years, she had worked in a cotton factory along with her 2 sisters. After marriage, they lived for a time in Lancashire. James, who had suffered severely from asthma since childhood, was told by his doctor that if he wanted to survive another winter, he must leave Britain. So they packed their belongings and in 1883 sailed to Australia. James was carried onto the boat on a stretcher, and Jane carried 8-month-old Nessie. They lived first at Guyra in New South Wales, and later they came to Queensland and lived at Gin. And James became a member of the Methodist circuit, preaching and visiting as far afield as Mount Morgan. After his brother George, an ordained minister of the Presbyterian Church, arrived from Scotland, James joined the Presbyterian Church as a home missionary, as unqualified men were called, and was in Bowen for some years before being called to Ayr. By then there were 5 children. Baby Nessie was now in her 20s, and a photographer with her own business in Bowen. A son Jim, born in Guyra, was managing a cane farm near Cairns. Gilbert was training to be a schoolteacher. Gertrude became the librarian at the Ayr School of Arts, and Malcolm, my father, worked in the telephone exchange in the Ayr post office. On the first Sunday that James Kirk preached in the Ayr church, the Shans were late. The first hymn was being sung as they arrived, and during the service, when giving out the intimations, Mr. Kirk gravely announced, "In future, the service will begin at 11 a.m. sharp." He did not wait, as the young single men had previously, great embarrassment for the Shans. James was in Ayr for 2 years, and he died at Babinda in 1918.